Hi Guy, welcome back CBS Beyond the Gates. Donnie had finally run out of strength to keep pretending. In Fairmont Crest, there were days when everything still looked flawless, like a perfect painting hung in exactly the right place, light spilling across glass walls at the right angle. Polished heels clicking over marble floors in the familiar rhythm of wealth and control. But beneath that polished surface, something darker and heavier kept spreading. A slow, suffocating exhaustion lived inside the kind of people who had carried hatred for too long. Donnie had been carrying it like a stone pressed into her chest, a vow to never turn back, half a wound that refused to close. She had once believed she would never look at Bill with anything but coldness again. She had convinced herself that whatever existed between them had burned into ash long ago, destroyed by betrayal, wrong choices, and the way they had shattered each other until breathing felt impossible. But not everything truly dies just because someone wants it to. Some feelings only grow more dangerous the deeper they are buried, because they don't disappear, change shape. They become a quiet, persistent ache, waiting for the one moment when it can erupt and consume everything. That moment arrived when Donnie finally chose to open her heart to Bill, as a victor. Not as a woman calculating her next move, but as a human being who was so tired she could no longer pretend to be invincible. Bill was not prepared for it. He had spent weeks living like a man who still controlled every outcome, as if every road in Fairmont Crest could be bent to his will with a few phone calls, a few deals, a few piles of money. Bill was used to people fearing him, hating him, or trying to flatter him. He was used to women either wanting him for what he had or resenting him for what he had done. But Donnie had always been different. Donnie was the one person who could stand in front of him, stare directly at the ugliest truth inside him, and never lower her head. She didn't run. She didn't soften. And still, she had the power to make him feel both cruel and empty at the same time. When Donnie finally spoke, there was no performance to hide behind, no familiar arrogance as armor, just a raw honesty that sounded like pain. It felt as if she was tearing herself open, placing the broken pieces in his hands, and accepting whatever it might cost her. Her words were not an apology. They weren't a plea. They were closer to a weary confession that she had lived too long inside hatred, and even hatred was no longer strong enough to hold her upright. She remembered the past not because she wanted it back, but because memory kept returning like a dull blade against her heart. She hated the fact that Bill could still shake her with nothing more than his presence. She hated that in her weakest moments, she still remembered the smallest details about him, the habits that once felt intimate. The way he looked at her like she was the only thing that could both destroy him and make him desperate to hold on. Donnie hated most of all the truth she could never erase. Even after she tried to cut him out of her life, she had never completely escaped the shadow he left behind. And when she finally admitted that, Bill froze, caught in a silence thick enough to choke them both. After that confession, Donnie did something no one saw coming. Not a loud gesture meant to make the entire neighborhood turn its head, but something quieter. Something instinctive, like a woman who had endured too long and suddenly refused to restrain herself anymore. She moved closer to Bill, crossing the safe distance they had forced themselves to maintain for so long, protected only by pride and anger. It wasn't weakness. It was a final gamble Donnie made against herself. She didn't say what she wanted, but her eyes betrayed everything, the unspoken question of whether, after all the hatred and ruin, they could still find their way back to each other, or whether they were simply about to burn the last remaining pieces of their hearts in one final collision. Bill felt the heat immediately. Something inside him flared, something both alive and terrified. He had known countless women, endless opportunities, but a moment with Donnie never carried the same meaning as anything else. It wasn't simple desire. It wasn't possession. It was the feeling of facing a part of himself he could not buy, could not force, could not manipulate. Donnie reminded Bill that he could be weak, that he could be wounded, that he could crave forgiveness even when he didn't deserve it. And worst of all, he realized that if he took even one more step toward her, everything would cross the line they had tried so hard to hold, line that kept them from becoming fools again. That tension grew sharper, tighter, like a rope stretched to the breaking point, waiting for one movement to snap and unleash something impossible to undo. But while Donnie and Bill stood on the edge of a moment that could rewrite everything, another threat was already creeping in from behind Bill's back, older and more calculated than any emotional conflict between them. Hayley, the wife Bill believed he could control, had hidden something vicious behind her smile and her performance of devotion. Bill had married Hayley as both a practical decision and an arrogant one, like proof that he could move on, restart, replace the past with a new present. But Bill's mistake had been brutal in its simplicity. He underestimated how far Hayley's ambition and cruelty could go. And it was Tomas, the last person anyone expected to saw the truth first. Tomas was no stranger to the shadows of Fairmont Crest. He was young, sharp, always standing in the right place to hear things he wasn't meant to hear. Tomas had cooperated with Hayley before. He had seen the coldness behind her eyes and assumed it was the usual hunger for status. But there was a line between ambition and brutality, between manipulation and murder. Hayley stepped over that line so smoothly it was terrifying, and Tomas accidentally stumbled straight into her darkest secret. The moment Tomas overheard Hayley speaking with Randy Parker hit him like a slap across the face. Not because he was innocent, but because even someone familiar with power games could still feel his blood run cold hearing a murder plotted with the precision of a business contract. Randy wasn't just a faceless accomplice, was Hayley's cousin, pulled into the scheme by blood and the same ruthless hunger. Their voices held no hesitation, as if they were discussing how to remove an inconvenience instead of ending a human life. Bill's name was spoken without any hint of a wife's emotion, no love, no anger, only calculation. He was reduced to a target, an outcome, something that had to disappear so money and power could finally belong to the one left standing. Tomas stayed frozen in the darkness, feeling as if the air around him had been drained away. He realized he was holding something too huge, too dangerous. If he walked away and pretended he hadn't heard it, he would become an accomplice to a death. If he spoke up, he would make himself the next problem Hayley would erase. Tomas understood Hayley well enough to know she could smile at him today, and tomorrow destroy his life without blinking if he betrayed her. That knowledge twisted his choice into something more than morality. It became survival. He had to place a bet, and he had to choose the winning side. And when he realized how close and serious Hayley's plan was, Tomas understood the truth. The winning side might not be Hayley at all. Because Hayley was greedy, and greed eventually made even the smartest predator slip. Tomas chose Bill, not out of loyalty, but out of cold logic. Bill, even as a potential victim, was still the kind of man with enough power to strike back, enough money to protect, enough ruthlessness to punish. Tomas also knew this. If Bill died, Hayley and Randy would not stop. Once they tasted blood, they would keep erasing anyone in their way, including Tomas, the moment he became a liability. So saving Bill was also saving himself. Tomas didn't rush in recklessly. He planned carefully, arranging a private meeting with Bill in a space safe enough that Hayley wouldn't suspect him immediately. And what made this different from every other negotiation Tomas had ever taken part in was his posture. He didn't come demanding more money. He didn't come bargaining. He didn't come fishing for a reward. He came carrying the truth that could collapse a marriage, ignite a war, and prevent a murder if Bill reacted fast enough. When Tomas placed the evidence in front of Bill, denial became impossible. It was a secret recording, Hayley and Randy plotting to poison Bill. The conversation wasn't vague, it was detailed, chilling. They discussed timing, methods, how to leave no trace, how to make the death appear accidental or medical. Tomas also revealed Randy Parker's identity with absolute certainty, proving Hayley wasn't acting alone. She had dragged her own family into the mud, built herself a network for murder. That made everything more horrifying, because it confirmed this wasn't impulse. It was preparation. It was commitment. Bill took the blow in the place that hurt him most, his arrogant belief that he always controlled the game. He sat there listening to the recording as if someone had stripped him bare, as if everything he once held in his hands had suddenly slipped through his fingers. His shock wasn't only about betrayal by his current wife. It was the collapse of the illusion that he could never be the prey. Bill had hurt people. He had betrayed. He had turned Donnie's heart into a battlefield. But he never believed someone beside him could quietly plan his death with a smile. That shock quickly turned into something colder. Bill couldn't react like an ordinary man. He fought himself, one instinct screaming to deny it, to assume Tomas was lying for leverage, and another part of him ruthless. Sharp mind that built his empire forced to admit the evidence was too real to fake. Bill understood then that in this marriage, he had been the one deceived. Hayley had stood beside him, touched his hand, looked into his eyes, played the role of loyal wife in public while privately calculating the moment his life would end and his fortune would become hers. The truth broke something inside Bill he refused to name. It immediately dragged Donnie into his thoughts, not as romance, but as an unavoidable comparison. Donnie had warned him, again and again, that relationships built on power rot from the inside. Donnie had paid for loving Bill, and now Bill was paying for believing he could replace real love with convenience. In Fairmont Crest, the most dangerous enemy was never the one who declared war openly, was the one who slept beside you and smiled every morning. Bill wondered what Donnie would feel if she learned the truth. Would she laugh at his humiliation? Or would she ache? Because no matter how much she hated him, she never wanted him to die like this. But Bill had no time to drown in questions, because after the shock came fury. And Bill's fury didn't explode loudly, it gathered slowly, thick and suffocating, like a storm charging with electricity. He looked at Tomas differently now, with suspicion, but also with sharp calculation. Tomas held the information that could save Bill's life, but he also held the knife that could cut Bill's throat if he changed sides. Bill's first instinct was money offering to pay Tomas to stay silent, because that was how Bill always solved problems. He bought secrecy. He bought loyalty. He bought control. But this offer smelled like desperation, like a man trying to purchase safety because he suddenly felt it slipping away. Tomas hadn't come begging, but he wasn't naive either. He understood the power of what he carried. He looked at Bill the way a man looks at a case that could change everything. Tomas knew if he made one wrong move, Hayley would hunt him down like an animal. But if he stood on Bill's side, he could protect himself and become more valuable than ever in this war. The tension between them wasn't enemy tension, it was the tension of two men forced into an uneasy alliance, where trust didn't exist. Only fear. Only advantage. Bill began considering how to expose Hayley, but the real question was how to do it without getting killed first. If he moved too quickly, Hayley would strike before he could protect himself. If he waited too long, his life would become a countdown. Bill realized Hayley wasn't the kind of woman who would retreat once she sensed danger. She would accelerate, choose the most unexpected moment, turn a peaceful dinner into a funeral. Suddenly, Bill started seeing his life through the eyes of a man who had never truly been afraid until now. Every glass of wine looked suspicious. Every pill felt like poison. Every kiss felt like a blade hidden under velvet. Bill hated the feeling it made him look like the weak man he always despised. But it also made him more awake than he had ever been. Meanwhile, Donnie was trapped in her own storm. She had opened up. She had moved closer to Bill, and now she had to live with the consequences of letting her emotions show. Donnie didn't know whether she had done the bravest thing of her life or the dumbest. She hated that Bill could still make her feel unsteady. She hated that one moment of vulnerability could collapse every wall she built. Donnie still carried anger. She still carried scars. But she also knew there were wounds that only deepened when you refused to look at them. The truth was simple and painful. She had never fully severed him. And that truth made her dangerous to herself, because if Bill reached for her, she wouldn't know whether to push him away or fall back into him. What Donnie didn't know yet was that while she wrestled with love and hatred, Bill was fighting something far uglier than emotion. A part of her still sensed a wrongness in the air, a tension that didn't come from feelings but from real danger. She didn't have proof. Only instinct of a woman who had survived too long in Fairmont Crest's quiet wars. Johnny knew Bill was always the center of someone's strategy. And if someone was pushing Hayley into a corner, Hayley would bite back like a trapped animal. Hayley was already standing on that edge. She wanted the money, the power, the freedom. She wanted Bill erased like an obstacle, but she also knew Bill wouldn't be easy to kill. That forced her plan to be tighter, cleaner, faster. And the moment her control cracked, Hayley would become twice as dangerous. She wouldn't just fear exposure, she would hate anyone who threatened to take the victory away from her. Hayley had dragged Randy into this, and that bond made her even more trapped. If the plan failed, she couldn't simply walk away. She had to push forward, because retreat meant destruction. Tomas understood that better than anyone. He knew he had just placed a bomb in Bill's hands. He also knew Hayley would feel the shift the moment something changed. People like Hayley lived by a predator's instinct to an instinct sharpened by deception. When liars sense their victim waking up, they don't wait. They strike. That realization made the air feel like it was counting down, every second heavy with the possibility of being the last if Bill didn't act fast enough. Bill stood in the center of it all and realized that this was no longer a story of love and hate. It was war. Hayley and Randy had already decided Bill would die. Tomas decided to gamble on saving him. Donnie unknowingly stepped back into danger by opening her heart. And Bill, the man who always believed he controlled the board, was now being forced to play a survival game he never chose. As every mask began to crack, Bill understood his next move would decide not only his life, but the fate of the woman he had never truly forgotten and the fate of the people who believed they could murder him and walk away with everything. He stared at Tomas as if weighing whether the recording should become a public weapon or a private trap. He thought of Hayley's smile and wondered what she would do when she realized she was cornered. He thought of Donnie and felt the brutal truth. If he hesitated, Donnie could become the next target. And just as Bill prepared to act, his phone vibrated an ordinary sound that suddenly felt like a death omen. Because the name on the screen was enough to shatter every plan forming in his mind, and if Bill answered, tonight might be the night Hayley moved first, turning everything into a tragedy no one could stop in time. The Beyond the Gate CBS Spoilers channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the series from the perspective of a longtime fan. This allows viewers to gain deeper, more objective, and interesting insights. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the series.